Recording. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you?
Cool. How's it going, man?
Good. Well, happy to have you here. Really privileged to actually speak to you. This is my hypertrophy enthusiast inspiration right here since day one. This is the man providing some of the most knowledgeable and best content on Natty YouTube and just all across all platforms right now.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. Well, thank you.
yeah, really thankful to have you on here. So how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. For just to test my microphone, does it sound like I'm closer here and then further away, and of course, about the same?
You sound good. You sound good.
Very cool. Because sometimes the dog makes noise, so I just want to make sure that he's with the mic. It's actually tolerable. So,
Great.
well, thank you
Great.
for those kind words.
No,
That's
of
very
course.
nice of you.
I'm super pumped to have you on here. Wow. No, it's a privilege. Yeah,
Well, thank
so
you.
so tell me about your training history. I want to dive into everything. Tell me about your training history. What got you in? I want the people that I'm trying to provide to right now to understand a little bit more about yourself. What got you into training at least? What's helped you progress the most? Where have you learned from? Has anyone really mentored you? I'm assuming you've read so many tons of articles and books, but obviously there's people that have helped you and those main things that have really escalated your performance and your physique, of course.
Yeah, so originally, I was a distance runner. So I was running, 60, 70, 80 plus miles a week. And, it's funny because I get comments like, oh, you must be so much happier now, or you must be so much more confident now with the physique. But actually, it's not that different. You kind of just find a new baseline. And one thing I've heard a lot actually is where people feel worse about their bodies after they develop their physique, right? Because I think often, especially if you consume a lot of fitness content, and I don't really feel that way, but I've heard it a lot. And I think if you consume a lot of fitness content, you're more aware of your physique and of physiques in general, right? Like if you watch a superhero movie when you're a kid, you're just like, oh wow, everyone's so big, like everyone's super impressive. But then after you consume a lot of fitness content, you're like, okay, actually, they're not as impressive, that kind of thing. I would say though that I didn't really have the normal motivations that most guys have when they start lifting. Right? Like it wasn't because I felt bad about myself. It wasn't to try to get women or impress women or anything like that. It was kind of just, oh, I'm tired of running and I want some kind of new physical activity to put my energy into. So it was kind of just, oh, like I'll try lifting weights. Like that sounds kind of cool, kind of interesting. And then, yeah, kind of just gradually took off from there.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, have you, obviously you're a coach now, have you ever been coached or have you always just explored on your own, all experimentation, of course, but
Yeah. I haven't had a coach. I'm open to the idea. For me to sort of let go of the reins of my training, so to speak, is a little bit difficult. So I think if I did hire a coach, I mean, it's usually a more collaborative process anyway, but I would definitely want to have a lot of input there because some coaches are just like, here's your plan, do this. There's no flexibility. There's no back and forth. And to
right.
me, that would be difficult to do for me at least. For some people, they're happy to do that. Oh, just tell me what to do. I don't want to really make any decisions. Just set it and forget it. For me, I really like the tinkering aspect of things. So I like, yeah, the experimentation and trying new things and having flexibility in my programming as well. And so I'm not opposed to the idea of getting a coach or having a coach, especially if it's something that I'm maybe not as experienced with, right? Like if I did a bodybuilding show, I might get a coach to help with the peaking, to help with the posing, to help with
Posing. If you're training, you know your body. It's the posing that
exactly.
kills everyone.
Yeah, yeah. The training side of things, I'm pretty comfortable and confident with. But yeah, I mean, if I wanted to do a powerlifting meet or something as well, I might hire just because I could probably figure it out myself eventually, but it might be faster to get someone who's more experienced with that. Yeah,
I think the bodybuilding show for you is coming before the powerlifting one, in my opinion.
probably. You know, it's
100%.
it's weird because
Your
I
physique.
would be a better bodybuilder than powerlifter for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but a powerlifting meet also, it doesn't require as much. I don't want to say it doesn't require as much sacrifice, but you can say, "Oh, there's a powerlifting meet this weekend. Let's do it." And you might not have the best possible performance that you could deliver if you built up to it and peaked and tapered and stuff, but like you could perform pretty well. You can't do the same with a bodybuilding show. Generally, you can't be like, "Oh, there's a bodybuilding show next week. Like, let's hop into it." But there are very few people who are within striking distance of a bodybuilding show in a week or two, right? There are some people who are naturally on the leaner side. Maybe they could say, "Oh, there's a show in a month. Maybe I could do that." But for me, I tend to stay fairly bulked up, and so yeah, bodybuilding show would be like 6 months. Let's do it. Let's aim for half a year away, just because I do like to stay more high teens than low teens.
Right, right, right. So, have you been thinking about it? Because in your videos, you've talked about just like not really, like not doing it just because of like your wife or your girlfriend. I think wife.
But
Um, yeah, and I don't know. You said there's just like constraints around that. You have your clients and everything, but you think you're going to be doing a show in the near future?
definitely not the near future. Maybe eventually. It's weird because being on social media, you have to almost separate out, am I doing something because I actually want to do it, or because of the expectation of other people, or because it would be interesting to people, or it would be good for content or something like that. And so I've definitely fallen into the trap of before, oh, let's do this. And then I later realized, oh, that wasn't actually because I really wanted to do it. It was, oh, it's an experiment for social media, or I'm going to deadlift to a max every day or something crazy, right? And so, yeah, as a content creator, it can be. I think it's important to separate out those things. And I noticed for a lot of content creators, they almost don't have the ability to do this, and so they think they're doing it for themselves, but in reality, they're actually doing it for their audience. And
Yeah,
so I kind of have to decide, is this something I really want to do? And or how much? Because it's not just a yes or no. It's like, how much do I want to do this? Is it something I really care about? Like, do I want to? And once I try it, do I want to pursue it further? I mean, I see all kind of comments like, "Oh, you definitely get your pro card if you competed nationally," that kind of thing. But I think a lot more goes into it than people realize. It's not just, "Oh, you look jacked on social media." There is the posing, as I mentioned. There's the conditioning, which I've gotten pretty lean, but maybe not quite to the point where I would want to be. But like the glutes fully in,
I think.
and I mean, real natural conditioning is like it's pretty insane.
Yeah,
And then I mean, the symmetry, I have some imbalances. I certainly have some weak points. On social media, you can, highlight your strong points and it looks crazy under the best circumstances with the pump, the lighting, all that stuff. But on stage, I've seen a number of people who looked a bit disappointing on stage. And I think that's because the content that they put out made them sort of look better than they actually were. And I could see how I might fall into that category, right? Where social media is not really reality, right? It's just sort of a version of it.
right. You were saying your weakness wasn't stage ready. I competed in a show like recently, like a couple months ago, like 2 months ago, and
Yeah.
I'm looking at your leanness, like your death coffin lean, as you quote unquote say it on your Instagram pictures, like that, like your recent cut or a couple months ago, that easily show ready. Like You looked a little
Okay.
depleted almost. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
saw some guys there that were completely out of shape. Like you would have like had something like 100%.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
look good.
I try to downplay that side of things because I know that there's always room for improvement, right? So maybe I
Yeah.
got down to like 8 or 9%.
And
I think Alex Leonidas was like, yeah, he was shredded, but the camera quality isn't good enough to really see it.
of
It's true
course, no,
because a lot of
yeah.
the stuff
It's always
you see yourself in real life, and then you see the potato quality, and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe I was pretty darn peeled, but it's it's something that I sort of downplay because like when I say shredded, to me, like I envision like the most shredded people I've ever seen who are just like there's just almost no fat left, 4, 5, 6%. Um, I think, yeah, my conditioning was fine. It's more the posing and then the weak points and then the imbalances. Yeah.
yeah. Let me just get a quick look at your arms because I've got a lot of questions about your arms. Like these are talking about the best arms
Yeah.
on on YouTube. Like, no, a little bit more up. Come on, the camera. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
Those triceps, the you know what's funny? Like you have very long forearms, and like me too. Like
Yeah.
my forearms are very long,
Yeah.
and when you have those long forearms compared to the short triceps and biceps, then your arm potential is kind of limited. Same with Alex Leonidas. He has the same thing. Although he has short arms, his forearms are still longer, right? Because
Mhm.
he has good benching. He 405 bench, the short arms
Yeah.
to help you with the bench. But when you have those like short insertions, your potential. I mean, you'll still get big, but not like crazy 20+ inch arms, you know. But you're already there. You're already there, and you
Well,
still
not
have.
quite 20.
And you're very long. You're tall. You have long arms, but you still have
Yeah.
amazing arms. So obviously the rope overhead extension is one of your that's your go-to bank your buck long head right there. I can't connect with it. I just can't connect with it.
Okay.
I do
How?
I do dumbbell overhead. That one's always helped me. I'm good at my dips and extensions, but it's really the overhead, that stretch for that long head that's the really builder.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of go back and forth between a few different variations, which maybe you could try. I actually have three overhead rope extension variations, which is probably a little bit excessive, but the first one I do is kind of strict. I think it's the way most people would do it, where it's behind you, the
Yeah.
attachment, and then it's kind of low. I don't like setting it all the way down because it's just easier to set up if it's just below the lowest point that you would get to. So you can kind of like quarter squat it up and then do your set and then quarter squat it back down. Where some people they set it all the way
Yeah,
down
yeah,
and then
yeah, 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 that's me.
yeah, yeah. I wouldn't do it that way. It's not like it's probably not going to get you hurt or anything. It's just kind of awkward to get it started. Whereas if you set it a little bit higher, it's just sort of right there. You can do your set and then put it back down. That one's pretty good. It doesn't really allow room for cheating, which in some ways is good, but in other ways, sometimes failure can happen very abruptly, right? Like you get a good solid rep, and then you go for the next one. You kind of just hit a sticking point, and you can't go anywhere, and it's just done. That's a fine variation. I like it. The other one I do is where the attachment's very high. And in this one, you kind of sort of have to twist around, but it's easier
Yeah.
because you're pulling down, which is a little bit more natural. And this one, I put my foot against the sort of the rack there for stability. And then you can also cheat on this one. So you can kind of drive into the movement and sway into it to go beyond failure. So I'll start fairly strict. And then as I hit a sticking point, I'll sort of sway through it as needed. And it's not totally cheated. I'm trying to still get grindy, difficult, challenging reps, but we're talking maybe 3 to 6 seconds per rep near the end. And then I just try to keep going as long as possible, getting progressively a little bit more cheated every single rep until I get to a point where I know it's just not productive anymore. And then I set it down. And then the third one is possibly my favorite. It's really growing on me. I wanted something kind of in between where it wasn't as cheated as that one I just mentioned, but it wasn't super strict like the first one either. It's kind of in the middle. And this is where maybe some people won't have access to it, but it's done on where I usually do push downs. And there's sort of this pad where you can, I think it's meant for crunches or something. And so I can just put my hips there. And so it's a little bit cheated. It gives you the ability to get your abs involved a little bit. But because the hips are fixed, it's the potential for cheating is not quite as much. And it does feel quite natural because you're bent forward, and I guess it's not even really overhead. It's underhead because you're tilted all the way down. But I like that variation as well.
So like a bent over. Well, the extension. There's obviously the vertical one, and then we have the extension that you really like. Is that the one
Yeah,
you?
So yeah, there's three of them, and
Yeah.
the last one, yeah, you're kind of bent forward because the attachment is from above you,
Yeah.
and so in order to extend, you're almost all the way bent over,
So it's
but
like
you're
a
still
down.
standing.
Yeah.
Exactly,
So,
you're still standing. Your hips are in place, but then you're pretty much all the way bent over. Not 100%, but you're
yeah.
probably 70 degrees down, pointed at the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we got the vertical, we've got the fully bent over, and then we've got it maybe straight across.
Yeah.
You gotta hit it from all angles, I guess.
Pretty much. I mean, it's not necessary for most people, I would say. Most people can just pick one and it's fine. I think a bigger point would be keeping the elbows high during the movement. I see a lot of people start to shrug up and start to do this kind of thing, and that kind of shifts it away from the long head. Sorry, my dog is messing with the cable. He's trying to get huge triceps, but you want to keep the elbows high and not be constricted like this and shrugged up. So you want to keep everything depressed, the shoulders low, and then the elbows high, which might require stretching out the lats a little bit or the teres just to get everything sort of pointed up. It's like if you're doing an ab and thigh or something. You want to keep the elbows up, and then you're sort of extending from that position. Especially if you don't have a strong long head, often the instinct is to sort of scrunch up and try to get the delts involved. And so, yeah, I would say for a lot of people, I do lighten the weight on these because they start bringing other muscles into play.
Yeah, for sure. Like then it's almost turns into like a skull over or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been doing some unilateral work at the extra stretch with that for the triceps. I don't know. Is there a favorite rep range? All reps are important. You know, progressive overload is key. I think we could both agree on that.
Yeah.
But you love your cheats, like well, not your cheats, but beyond failure training, and I guess that's really essential for the triceps. Am I wrong?
I don't know if I would say it's essential, but it's certainly something I found benefit from. This is where if someone's a beginner, they might look at an advanced lifter and say, oh, like that's the thing, but they might not be ready for it yet. And so I would say the technique would come first. And it's a little bit hard to say, like, without actually seeing how you're moving. Like, it might be fine, or there might be some room to tweak things. It's a little hard to say. And then, so technique first, and then I would say proximity to failure. Usually just sort of working towards a grindy rep. You know, I see some people where they're really enamored and excited by the beyond failure stuff, but learning how to go to failure. And again, like, I'm not sure. I would have to see a set to be able to assess this. Like, I assume you're pretty jacked. I'm sure you know how to train to failure. But like getting to that point and then thinking about the beyond failure stuff. And I've actually kind of walked back some of the beyond failure stuff to where I'm trying to go for really high quality reps all the way to failure. And then the reps beyond failure also really, really high quality. Whereas before I'd be like, maybe lazy is not the right word, but I would be like, okay, I'm going to be going like 8 reps beyond failure. And so the 2 failure would be like, okay, kind of not as focused until like, oh, I guess now I'm at failure. You know, I think you have to keep in the moment, in the set, the entire time until it's genuine failure, and then maybe a few beyond, but like really high quality, and not just sort of flailing around. And for me, it's taken a lot of practice to get to the point where I've been able to do that. And so, yeah, it's sort of a work in progress even now.
Very cool. So now, anything particular with your biceps? I mean, obviously, just all positions, right? Preacher curls, lengthened position,
Yeah,
incline curls, brachialis. Can't neglect that, right? You have very impressive ones. You love you're doing them every time you go to the gym. I see it.
pretty much. Yeah,
Exaggeration, but every arm day or bro day, it's happening. Do you like
yeah.
doing your brachialis training before your bicep training, or do you just like it's by feel?
Yeah, no, I prefer hitting hammer stuff before like a sort of stretch focused, either a preacher or an incline or something like that. Something where it's a little bit, it's underhand and a little bit more lengthened,
Right.
just because it's really just an elbow thing at that point. Most guys who I've talked to who have gotten big arms, they've had tendonitis at some point, and not maybe not most, but it's quite common. Guys who just either weren't warmed up enough or trying to overdo things. And so, yeah, I find hammer stuff before at the beginning has helped a lot. And then you also get brachialis and forearms, which I think are quite important. And that they do add a look to the arm that you don't see all that often, right? Just sort of this roundness and thickness and fullness in that mid arm, that upper arm, that is, it looks really cool. It adds a lot to the arm. And so, yeah, I put that first. Not a ton, maybe 2 to 3 sets at this point. Could be cable, could be dumbbells, sometimes one arm at a time. I have a few different variations that I like. And those are beyond failure as well. It's very, very failure friendly generally, because it's often going to be most challenging in the top position. And so you can kind of go until you can't quite get to the top, and then you keep going, and you can add sort of like a little bit of cheating sometimes. And so, yeah, I found that to be quite useful. And if there's two areas of the upper arm that add a lot to it, it would be the overhead work and the long head of the triceps, and then
Right.
the brachialis as well. I see a fair number of people with decent biceps, okay overall triceps, but then the long head just is lacking that sweep. But then they're lacking brachialis as well. And of course, maybe partly genetics, but I think a lot of that is just the training.
So now, are you going thumbless grip on the hammer curls to get that extra range of motion positioning, or is there any like underneath the
No,
table type of things with grips?
no, I use thumbs. I think that often the limiting factor is going to be your grip when doing, especially dumbbell hammer curls. With the rope, it kind of saves you, and so usually you can hold on to the rope without too much of an issue. Sometimes the ends of the rope will bubble together, and so having a little bit of stability in the shoulders and not pushing the ends of the rope together
Right.
and kind of keeping them not apart, but also it's just if you push them together too much because you're trying to find stability, then they tend to sort of slip past each other. And so, yeah, just building that skill of having the rope in close, but learning not to push them together too much is a good thing to build up. But yeah, I would say I just grab the dumbbells, and I use the thumbs because thumbless, sometimes I do like it on some pressing movements just because it allows a little bit more rotation and freedom of movement. But for hammer curls, yeah, I think the thumbs are pretty close to a necessity, especially if you're going heavy.
Okay, very cool. Now, I mean, would you say you're doing I'm not. Do you do forearms much anymore, or just throw it in here and there?
Yeah, not super commonly or consistently. I find that a bit of reverse curl stuff and then the hammer curl stuff is kind of all I need. I've done it occasionally, and if someone said to me, hey, we have your loved ones hostage and you need to grow half an inch on your forearms over the next 6 months, I'd be doing a lot of isolation for sure. But it's one of those things where it's not a super important area for me. And as long as they're not small, then I'm okay with it. So I wouldn't say it's a super high priority. But if it came for some weird hypothetical kind of messed up reason, then yeah, I would probably isolate.
But definitely arm days are needed for maximizing growth. I mean, you make that clear, right?
I don't know about that. I mean, maximizing is a tricky word because if someone gets to sort of 98% of their potential or 97% of their potential, they might think they're maximized, right? But you don't know what might give you that extra 2 to 3%. So it might be having an arm day, but I see a lot of guys who are very, very jacked and they don't have an arm day and they've never had an arm day. I will say, I think it's worth trying for almost everyone, just at least to see how it feels. Because, I mean, it's just part of programming, right? I think trying an arm day, you don't really have anything to lose. And it's a pretty easy thing to program around, right? I mean, if you're doing an upper lower split, just do upper lower, and then throw in an arms day at that point. And so, if you're doing push pull legs, you can toss in an arm day. It might expand out your week a little bit, but it's not that hard to do. And so yeah, I think it's worth trying, but I'm not so confident that I would say it's needed to maximize growth because I have seen a lot of people who don't do it and are still pretty darn jacked.
Yeah. And when I'm talking about growth, I'm talking about arm growth, particularly, not full body, by the way.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary to maximize arm growth.
Okay.
Maybe it is for some people. Certainly, I've had a lot of benefit from it, but if I didn't have an arm day for the past few years, I could still find ways to prioritize arms and get in the quality training that I needed with some other split, right? If it was upper lower or full body or push pull legs or something else, like I could still find a way to get it done. This is sort of just my preference.
Right, right, right. 100%. Um, Now, are you on a particular training program, or are you have your routine and you take rest days when needed? Because in recent times you talked about training every day, but now you said you're doing lower volume, or at least I guess that doesn't mean days off, but just lower volume in the gym, but you're still training every day. Tell me.
So I've kind of been doing the same thing for a long time where my default is training every day and then I just take days off when I need to, right? So some days that might be 7 days a week, or some weeks that might be 7 days a week. Um, sometimes I'll go 8, 9, 10 days with no days off. Other weeks it might be 5 days a week, right? It's rarely less than 5 days a week, and I would say it probably averages about 6 days a week at this point. So I just go by feel. I mean, if I wake up and I just feel kind of wrecked, or let's say I usually go by specifically on that day, do I think I would have a good workout? And so let's say I have a lower body day planned and I woke up and my hamstrings are still sore and, maybe my lower back's a little tight. And I just know based on experience that it's unlikely I'll be able to have a good workout. Now, sometimes in those circumstances, you do have a good workout, right? Like you're a little bit sore, or you can tell there's still a little bit of lingering fatigue, and you go in and you warm up, and hey, you can actually add weight to the bar. I've had that happen a ton, but there are also circumstances where you're just not ready, and you either repeat performance or you just can't replicate the performance of before. And so at this point, I kind of err on the side of just pushing the workout back a day because there's really very little downside to that. And your rate of having a good productive workout goes up significantly just based on my own experiences. So I kind of go by feel. And I mean, I think there's enough entropy in training that you kind of have to learn to go by feel, right? Because you might auto regulate, your volume might be slightly different on different days. And so, levels of stress, sleep, all these other things that it's really hard to predict. Oh, I'm going to be recovered on this day. You have a general idea. Oh, let's say if I do 2 sets of RDLs really hard, okay, it takes me on average 5 days to recover. That might be 4 if everything's really on point. It might be 6 or maybe even 7 if maybe you're dieting or your stress levels are a little bit high or you miss an hour or two of sleep or something like that. And so, yeah, I tend to go by feel at this point on that kind of stuff.
So you're training so much, like, and obviously you're recovering. Many people do not have your recovery capabilities due to your work capacity. I mean, you were a crazy
Yeah.
distance runner before, right? And
Yeah.
not many people know that. And I guess that
Uh,
allows you to train so often. Is that why you're like your growth is so significant just because you're able to train so much? Like there has to be some correlation.
I think that's part of it. It's a little bit hard to A/B test because I can't have like if I was never a distance runner, what would my recovery capacity and capabilities be, right? And so, yeah, exactly. So I would say it's definitely a role. And I have noticed a trend among really high level natural bodybuilders where they do have that base of aerobic activity, whether it's distance running or rowing or something else, they have that foundation built up. And so I do think it plays a role just because being in overall good shape, you don't really appreciate it until you try to coach someone and they're really not in good shape, right? Like they're getting out of breath easily, or they just can't perform the work, or they have trouble recovering. And so even if I wasn't necessarily building muscle during my time as a runner, I was kind of laying that foundation of fitness, of capillarization, of delivering nutrients and clearing waste products. I mean, even if I do an all out set of RDLs, let's say I do 3 plates all out for, 15 reps or even 20 reps, and the set lasts over a minute. I mean, my heart rate is elevated, but I'm not crushed. I mean, when I see people puking in the gym and like they're just absolutely destroyed, they're just in bad shape, right? The exception might be if someone is amazingly strong, right? Like if I see someone use a mountain of plates on the leg press for 15 or 20 reps and then they puke afterwards, okay, like you did a lot of work. And so it's kind of expected. But man, if someone's doing 1 plate per side on squats and they do 8 reps and they're just like totally gassed out or something, I mean, it's just a work and it's just a work capacity issue. And then often their recovery capacity is not good as well because those things often sort of go hand in hand.
So now to go on with this work capacity talk and training amount, because this whole thing with recovery coming into question. What do you think about like the whole 100 reps training for the your undertrained muscle groups? Have you heard about this phenomenon?
I think I heard something on T Nation, maybe like a warm up, like you do 100 reps of leg press to increase capillarization or something.
I read this book that was recommended by some guy named Hersoviak on YouTube. He's like a very well-known natural bodybuilder. You might
Yeah.
know of him. And he
Yeah.
recommended some strength training book. And it talked about training your undertrained muscle groups at the end with 100 reps, and you just progressively overload that, and you do it on your opposite body part splits. And there might be a little bit of bro science to it. But he just talked about like you constantly do that, even at such a light weight, it just builds up this muscle work capacity for your underutilized muscle groups. Like
Yeah.
I think that bro science has its time and place with training because honestly, there's so much like bro science, and then you've got your science training world, or you know what I mean, exercise science, and you got the
Yeah.
hyperoptimal gurus, unilateral kneeling pull downs, hit the lower lat striation. Like I think it's a mix of everything, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that kind of thing. I wouldn't say it's directly for hypertrophy, but it's almost like Rich Piana's
Yeah, exactly. Feeder.
He would do like filler workouts. I forget what he called them,
The feeder.
flushing workouts or something
Yeah, you
at
go.
night. Where you're just pumping the muscle full of blood. Yeah, it's not for muscle growth. It's kind of like partly for work capacity, partly for recovery. You basically just try to get the biggest pump imaginable. And yeah, you're right. You do it on an off day. Like maybe you're training your arms for real every 4 days. You would do that, every 4 days, but alternated, right? So workout 2 days later, you do this pumping thing. Then 2 days later, you have a real workout. Then you do the pumping thing. And so I don't know if I would say it's like the key to growth. I haven't done much of that, but certainly if someone is like lacking the ability to contract a muscle and sort of connect with it, it could be useful, could be beneficial. I wouldn't use it much. And so actually it's almost like the Team 3D Alpha, what's it called, nucleus overload training.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
where you just
Yeah, something
yeah,
similar.
I think Megan's methods are fairly similar to that, where it's like a lot of volume, but not maybe not close to failure. It's not like quote unquote real hypertrophy training. It's almost like an accessory to that. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So have you ever experimented with this? Like, do you have any results, or you just like going by your feel in training?
Yeah, I haven't really, but then again, maybe I haven't needed it because
Right,
especially for lower body, I have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of reps of running, which,
right.
maybe there's a similarity there. Probably not exactly the same stimulus, but man, when you're doing tons and tons of 30 to 60-second hill sprints and you're getting your heart rate up super, super high, and I think you're probably getting something fairly similar in terms of just the local fatigue and the capillarization. And then it's also good for general work capacity because the thing about the 100 rep stuff, it's really just local. It's not getting your heart rate up all that much. Maybe if it's like a quad or a glute kind of flex or something, because those muscle groups are big enough that they can cause enough systemic stress to get the heart rate up. But if someone is doing a whole bunch of like forearm stuff or biceps or triceps, it's just not going to be cardiovascularly taxing. But it might be locally taxing on the local cardiovascular system, right? The vascular system in particular, where, maybe you are building capillaries and the ability to send nutrients in and shuttle waste products out. So yeah, I'm not opposed to it. It's just not something that I've done. And so I can't say that I have any super strong thoughts on it one way or the other.
Okay, cool. So we were talking about nucleus overload.
Oh yeah.
Got cut off by technical difficulties. Apologies for that. And our Chinese little exchange, Mandarin. So my next topic I want to talk about, like, and then we were talking work capacity, endurance, like lift specialization. Our goal is hypertrophy, but we like doing certain lifts, right? And we want to build them. That's possible to obviously incorporate into regimen, right? I don't know if you're into that right now. I don't think you are, but yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm specializing in any particular lift with specific strength goals. But man, if you talk to pretty much any bodybuilder, they almost always have at least some idea of where they want to be with the lifts they're doing.
Right.
Right. I mean, I don't know any bodybuilder who doesn't want to get stronger, right? Because they know that they have to, on the right movements with the certain technique, on the reasonable rep ranges, like you have to be getting stronger, otherwise you're not really making progress, right? And so I would say I don't have typical strength goals. Like I don't particularly care about a 1 rep max barbell bench press or a barbell bench press for any number of reps, or a deadlift from the floor, or a squat done, probably low bar with optimal quote unquote technique for strength. I don't really care about powerlifting strength, but I still want to be getting stronger on the lifts that I'm doing. And I think to a certain extent, your program should probably be specialized enough that you are making progress. Because I think at a certain point, if you're advanced enough, it's really hard to make progress if your program is just totally random. You're just throwing in movements with no consistency, because you want to be able to stay in touch with these movements in order to drive that progression over time.
Right. Okay. Now, would you say that it's gonna cut into your own goals? I mean, it probably will, like general overall hypertrophy. Like if you're gonna like specialize in the bench, like Alpha Destiny, it's gonna cut into your progress because you're doing your strength work, right? I mean, you'll still gain
Probably.
muscle, but
I mean, I could still make gains across my whole body, but there's always small sacrifices, right? In terms of, you just have a limited amount of energy and time that you can devote to the gym. And so if you're doing a lot of very specific bench work with lower reps in order to really build that skill of bench pressing, I mean, yeah, it does take away, at least marginally, from other stuff that you could be doing. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that bench training is killing your gains. You can work around it, but it might be, there might be some drawbacks at times, especially if you're really trying to train in like a very low fatigue environment and really be fresh for your sessions. And if you're peaking and tapering and trying to compete, and then you're trying to really, get stronger, especially very low reps over time. Yeah, there's certainly some, at least small trade-offs there.
okay, interesting. And now with like regional hypertrophy, like targeting the quote unquote inner chest, like what do you
Yeah.
have to say about all of this? Like there's just like, oh, the hex press with the dumbbell, like I think that's all extra. It'll all grow in proportion and symmetry. You see so many people doing random crazy things in the gym. Yeah. I just
Yeah, I
don't,
mean, it's definitely a thing. So there's certainly regional hypertrophy.
yeah.
If you look at some movements, they maybe cause a little bit more lower quad growth or upper quad growth or lower hamstring growth or upper hamstring growth. And you can kind of go based on soreness to a certain extent, where if you do RDLs, they might make your upper hamstrings sore, whereas maybe you do some hamstring curls and maybe they make more your lower hamstring sore. I would say that's going to be a pretty decent indicator of where you're regionally going to be growing. To me, it wouldn't really make sense to get sore in one area and then have another area grow more, or even if it grows equally. To me, I think if you stress an area more, it's going to grow more. I mean, if you do your calf extensions a certain way, your calf raises, if you internally or externally rotate or change your foot position, it'll cause a slightly different sensation and slightly different soreness. And I think the growth is going to be a little bit different as well. And I think actually studies have confirmed this, where your foot position can make at least somewhat of a difference. Now, I think this can definitely be taken to the point of over analysis. And I definitely get a lot of DMs from people who are like, should I do this movement for this fiber and this fiber and this fiber and this fiber? I mean, the vast majority of people are not advanced enough to really have to worry about that. And even for me, a lot of the stuff I don't really put a lot of emphasis in. And so, yeah, so I think it's worth learning about if you're more advanced, and that could make a small difference. But for me, a lot of the stuff I think about, and then I'm like, okay, is this actually practical? Is it going to result in me having like 8 different exercises for the back to target like this area and this area and this area, and then this one's for this, and this one's for this, and this one's for mid traps and rumblings? And so often it looks good on paper, but then you try to apply it in practice and it just doesn't work out as well.
Right, right. I feel like so many people overthink it. I mean, there's so much training
Yeah.
overthinking paradox nowadays. You get so much new equipment, fancy machines, like it's just so derailing, Just making
Yeah.
it out, trying to get jacked, and you just see everything, but when you're consuming this content, you know. But to the average person,
Yeah.
overwhelming to say the least. Now with diet, like, are you obviously you get your protein in, whatever, zero point 0.8, 1 gram per pound of body weight, maybe even more on some days for you. I'm sure you've had your experimentation. Would you say that higher meal frequency or higher protein consumption throughout a day is more important than like the micros that you're getting? Like, let's say you're just eating like, okay, I got my 4 chicken broccoli servings in a day, or I could have like good old eggs in the morning, pasture raised for lunch, have like a nice wild caught salmon, and then for dinner have this just monsoon of a grass-fed steak. I think that's probably going to be the better option, even though you're not getting that extra protein feeding in to speed up the protein synthesis window. Like, I feel like I'm team micros more so than just shoving food down your throat the whole day, because then you get sluggish, you know?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people they focus a ton on the macros and then not at all on the micros. And yeah, I think that is definitely a mistake. And I think beyond roughly 3 meals per day, beyond that, the frequency probably doesn't matter all that much. I mean, you're going to get diminishing returns. If someone's eating once per day, bumping that up to twice per day, I think is going to provide pretty significant benefits. 2 to 3 also benefits, I would say. 3 to 4, maybe slightly, but then you go to 5 and 6, and it's just beyond that, you're you're kind of already in a fed state, and you're digesting meals for a lot longer than most people think. I mean, just because someone gets hungry 2 hours later, that doesn't mean the previous meal isn't still digesting. It's still releasing amino acids and nutrients into your system. And so, yeah, I don't count macros anymore. I haven't for a very long time. So when people ask me my protein intake, I don't know. Yeah, I would say probably, if I had to guess, somewhere between 150 to 200 grams a day, but maybe it's slightly higher than that some days, perhaps a slightly lower than on some days. And so it's not something that I worry about that much or at all, really. I kind of just eat more or less like a normal person. And then I will say that I do prioritize getting in a decent amount of protein at every single feeding. It doesn't feel like a meal if I'm not getting in a decent amount of protein, right? Like when people are, their meal is pure carbs. It's just, I don't know. To me, that doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm just sort of, why are you taking in the calories if you're not also taking in some protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis? So just as a habit, I tend to, I would say, get in at least 30 to 35 grams of protein per meal. But that's more habitual than actually focusing on it.
Okay. So, but in a day, would you say now you're having like 4 meals, or you're just honestly like 3 meals, normal person, you just eat more?
Yeah, usually 3. Yeah, I don't. So I do intermittent fasting typically. If I'm not hungry in the morning, I typically just won't eat. And then maybe I'll have something before training if I'm hungry. But there have been some days when I didn't eat in the morning. I went to train around 2, and then I came back and I had my first meal around 5:30 or 6. Like I have no problem doing that at all, especially when bulked up. Now, as I get leaner, I find I get hungry a little bit more frequently just because I have less fuel to use on my body. But I mean, I did a 3-day fast actually somewhat recently. And so, yeah, with being 18, 19, 20% body fat, there's a lot of flexibility that you have because you do have that fuel in terms of having body fat on your frame. Man, if I was 10% body fat, there's no way I could do that. No way.
Yeah, no. It
So,
gets it gets a little bit treacherous as you get less and less and
oh
less,
yeah, yeah,
fortunately. Now, but I'm assuming you focus on your micros at least. And honestly, let me just say for my personal experience, like I don't really like enjoying training with like low food in my system or just going fast. And I've done it, and I've actually had some decent performances, but I do better, and my progress is better when I get my meat when I have a meal in before
yeah.
or earlier in the day. I'm training in the morning particularly. top of the circadian rhythms. Um, now, it's crazy how big you got, and you do intermittent fasting. Because like the average Mike Israetel of the world will critique you and be like, you're not experiencing optimal gains, yet you're more jacked than him, and you're natural. You know, so it's
I
kind
don't
of
know if
like,
I wouldn't say I'm more jacked than him. I mean,
well, he was on
it's,
gear at some point.
yeah, he's been on gear for a long, long time. This is where it's difficult to compare. And I almost kind of just view it as like separate activities or separate sports. Like the minute someone becomes enhanced, you're kind of comparing against all enhanced athletes. Now you could be like, oh no, like this is the dosage versus their dosage, but to me, once you make that leap, you're kind of comparing yourself to everyone on that side of the pond. So to be clear, Mike Israetel's, I mean, if you look at like fat-free mass, he's much more jacked than me, much, much more jacked. Um, I would rather have my physique personally than his, but yeah, I don't think it's accurate to say I'm more jacked than him. And this might change as he goes off dosages and he, probably eventually will downsize, but um, it's a little bit hard to compare enhanced versus natural physiques. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because yeah, but then there's also like, what would happen if I went enhanced, right? Like, so I don't even want to say, oh, if I took drugs, I'd be bigger than, because like, how would you know? You don't know your response to them or anything like that. So yeah, it's a little hard to say.
We talked about like you briefly touched on like your RDLs, your very high rep RDLs with the barbell, like you said, like 3 plates for
Yeah.
20 reps. Like, what'd you say about like programming the deadlift? Because obviously you got RDLs and they'll hit your spinal erectors greatly. Obviously, hamstrings, glutes, compound lift. It's probably what all
Yep.
you need for your hamstrings. But then you've got Jordan Peters with that crazy back thickness, saying you need a pull off the ground to really maximize your back. Like RDLs will do maybe 80%, but you need that off the floor pull to really like get that back thickness. What would you say about that? Or,
I wouldn't entirely agree, but I understand where he's coming from. I will say that my RDLs are basically to the floor. So it's kind of like I'm pulling from a very similar location. I mean, my RDLs are usually within an inch of the floor, right? And so it's probably a fairly similar stimulus. I will say that my RDLs are not all that stiff legged. And so that might be a bigger difference than how much of the absolute range of motion, right? Because if you're stiff legged, you're going to be getting more bent over because you're keeping your hips higher, right? Whereas
right?
if you allow a little bit of knee bend, it changes the movement a little bit. I
Mhm.
would say there is a difference in how people do RDLs. So you see some people where they keep the back very flat, they push the hips back, and it's kind of like a pure hinge, and they're almost like staying upright as well. I would say in terms of like the thickness and the spinal erectors, you're probably losing a little something there because there's not much active range of motion, and then you're also not getting bent over enough that you're really taxing the spinal erectors as much as you could. And so that's more of sort of a hamstring posterior chain, adductors, glutes, hamstrings type of movement. And it's fine. Like it's good for that for sure. But if someone's like, hey, I just want a gnarly, thick back, I would probably either have them pull from the floor, stiff legged, perhaps from a deficit if they have the mobility, or do their RDLs where they are allowing maybe a little bit of upper back rounding. Because you do see some deadlifters where their chest is like totally caved in at the start,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
they're getting a lot of back. They're like their RDLs. There's a lot of sort of rounding and unrounding of the spine, which is, I mean, it's great for the spinal erectors, but there's always a trade-off. Like for me, when I do RDLs, there's a good amount of hamstring, but I don't think I could maximize my hamstring development with that style of RDLs, just because they're often, it's hard to say if they're the limiting factor, but there's just so much other stuff going on that I don't think they're being trained quite to their fullest potential. at least in that style.
Right. Okay. Now, are you RDLing 2 times a week, or do you honestly think that like for back thickness, you only need it 1 time a week, like 2, 3 sets, like especially with the conventional
Yeah.
deadlift, even.
Yeah, no, it's heavy, hard hinges taken really close to failure
Yeah.
are some of the most taxing
Fatiguing.
stuff you can do in the gym.
Yeah.
So
Week.
yeah, once a week. And then I actually found that my sort of best setup is once a week on that kind of stuff. And then the second workout is either something lighter and stricter and more hingy. So maybe a good morning where it is sitting back and keeping the back flat, or a back extension. For me, I find back extensions are a lot more hips. I actually don't feel my back a lot during a back extension, particularly compared to something like an RDL. Or I will do a rack pull from the knees. So it's not getting quite as bent
Oh,
over,
yeah.
but it's heavier and it's still working that rounding and unrounding of the upper back. Because usually the limiting factor, it is your lower back. It's not necessarily your upper back. And so you do your RDLs once a week, just heavy, focused, really hard. Right now, I'm more like 2 sets rather than 2 to 3. I've done 3, I've done 4, 5, 6. I've done a whole bunch of sets, but like I found 2 sets is like the best for me for that movement. Occasionally 1, but I think 2 is probably the way to go. And then the other session, you either elevate the bar so you're not getting as much range of motion, which makes it easier to recover from, even if it's heavier, or you keep the lower back flat, super strict, and try to keep it in the hips as much as possible.
Right. Right. Cool. All right. So with there's like so many lifting phenomenons. Have you experienced the infamous? Because I feel like I have rib cage expansion from pullovers. Like,
Right.
did-
Not
I
not
don't.
really. But it's hard to measure, and it's hard to, yeah, that's one piece of bro science that
I like it.
I
I
have experienced, but I'm also not discounting because I've heard it fairly frequently, not
okay.
ubiquitously, but I have heard it a number of times. I think it's probably more postural than structural,
Yeah.
right? Because this idea that like, oh, your ribs are actually separating and like the intercostals
Yeah.
are moving apart, or like the
Yeah.
cartilage in between your ribs. I mean, if like a 6-year-old or 8-year-old did it for many years,
Yeah.
maybe, or something. Like, I think once you're a grown ass man, I mean, I didn't even start lifting until I was 25 years old. So I think a lot of that stuff is kind of just more or less solidified in terms of your bone structure. But certainly in terms of like opening you up and like stretching out your abs, I think, yeah, that's probably more what it's doing rather than making your bones expand or separate or stretch or anything like that. You know?
Okay, yeah, because I don't know, there's so much with that golden hour bookworm guy talking about the doctors looking at the cartilages expansion over the years. It's pretty interesting and natural hypertrophy. I've been
Yeah,
doing it a lot. I mix up my grips, supinated, neutral, pronated, wide, close,
yeah,
incline, pause, everything, and just to go. And it helps with that vacuum because it really builds up that serratus. So you know what? I'm
yeah,
honestly kind of team bro science right there. Rib cage expansion.
yeah. And ultimately, I think it's interesting to know the why or the how or the mechanisms. We need a study on pullovers ASAP. But at the end of the day, if the difference in aesthetics is due to actual expansion or just due to your ability to have a better vacuum or to control those muscles, it doesn't. I'm not sure if it actually matters all that much. Like, it's interesting, but ultimately, does it or does it not make a difference? That, to me, that's more important.
Okay, and now with fatigue management, I'm going back to your endurance stuff, but it was just something on the list. Like, how do you recommend, like, to really like maximize hypertrophy? Are you going to eventually prescribe one of your clients or something like that? You're eventually going to have to train every day just to be as jacked as you possibly can. Because you look at the Jeff Nippers of the world or Alex Leonidas, they're taking rest days, but I guess everyone's unique right? And you're a workhorse, right? You got the racehorse and the workhorse. You talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what are you doing? Are you doing anything to optimize your recovery, or it's just your work capacity?
Yeah, I would say mostly just basic stuff. I mean, sleeping well, 8, 9 hours a night, a low stress environment. I think that plays a bigger role than most people realize. Eating regularly, eating well, eating enough, not maintaining like a low body fat percentage. I notice people where it's like they're doing everything they can for recovery, but they're 8% body fat. And it's really hard in that state to recover well. At least I found. And so, I find my sleep is a lot better at 15 to 20% compared to like 12% and under. I
Right.
mean, if I'm up at 18, 19, 20%, I sleep through the night probably 360 days a year. There's a handful of days, a handful of nights per year. Maybe I'll wake up briefly in the middle of the night, but for the most part, I'm like once I'm out, I'm asleep if I'm at this body fat percentage. Usually, when I diet down, somewhere around 13 to 14%, maybe 12%, I'll start occasionally waking up in the middle of the night, going to the bathroom, and going back to bed. But I can go back to sleep really easily, so I don't think it really impacts things very much. 11, 10%, the shreds, the details start to come out.
Right.
I'll be waking up every night, usually just once, and I can usually fall back to sleep, but it becomes a little bit more difficult sometimes. 9%, 8%. I'm kind of just, the end of my cut last year, for the last couple of weeks, I was probably sleeping about 3 to 5 hours a night, every night. Just, you usually go to bed around midnight, and then at 3 or 4, sometimes 5 in the morning, you're up and you can't go back to sleep. You're hungry and you can't, you're tired but wired. You're always in that fight or flight state, so to speak. And it's just really hard to recover from your training when you're doing that. So you have to drop your volume. You have to it's weird because you have okay session because your work capacity is still there, but then you can't recover for the next session if you're doing like even a reasonable amount of volume that you used to be able to recover from. And so, yeah, sleep is huge. And then you're stressed out because your sleep impacts your stress and you're in a more fragile state. And so, yeah, sleep and stress are
And
much better when I'm up at a bulk state, right? And then food, I eat enough. Obviously, you can eat more when you're bulked up. Your metabolism is faster. You feel better. I mean, it's not a huge difference in metabolism, but I have heard people who bulk on 4,000 and then they cut on under 2,000. And so, yeah, equilibrium. I don't count calories anymore, but I'm probably like high 3,000s when I'm bulked up, and that's kind of my maintenance. And then when I'm cutting down, a lot of the time, probably under 2,000. And so
oh
I
yeah,
think just that difference in food volume and micros and just overall energy that you have, it's a very different situation. And so I would say a lot of my progress is due to being willing to bulk. And a lot of people in the fitness industry, the shreds sell. If you're 8, 9, 10% body fat, like you sell more programs, people trust you more, like they take your word for it. They're like, oh, how do you get in shape? Like you're more of an authority when you're shredded down. And then when you're bulked up, you lose a lot of that. You can't get as big of a click through rate. And so, yeah, it is tougher. And I think a lot of natural lifters could be bigger. It's just tough when you're in social media because you're kind of tied to staying in shape pretty much year round. And so, yeah, I would say one thing that I've kind of sacrificed to a certain extent some social media growth potential for physical growth potential. Yeah.
of course. Now, just going back to just overall like do you modify your lifts a lot? Like obviously you change grips, there's tempos, unilateral, pause. You tend to delve into that, or you just kind of like I'm gonna track my training. Like, are you logging down everything, like your reps and every work? You must like training log, right? You talk about in your ebooks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I track most stuff. So pretty much all compounds I track, and I try to keep fairly consistent with my technique. Now that might mean on some lifts they might get progressively cheatier as the set goes on. So maybe a hammer curl, I'm starting fairly strict, and then by the end there's a little bit of oomph because I want to try to maintain that range of motion and get to that top contracted position that is most difficult. So maybe I'll cheat a little bit, or maybe I'll use partials depending on how I feel. But they're still tracked. It's just when you do those things, either the partials or the cheat reps, there's a little bit of blurriness in the tracking, right? Like if I do say a closed grip bench press, there's no partials because it's the bench press and I'm not going beyond failure. Like that just doesn't really make sense unless you have a training partner, maybe, maybe probably not even then. And then there's no cheating because I usually do the Larson style or without a lot of leg drive anyway. And so if you gain one rep on your close grip bench press, that's a pretty good indicator that you actually progressed, right? Whereas if you do one more rep on hammer curls, maybe you just cheated a little bit more and got one more rep, right? Or maybe the range of motion dropped off and you countered it anyway. So I kind of have movements that I know are strict and I know are indicative of making progress and of driving progression. And then I have lifts that I still track the number of reps I get, but I'm aware that there's some wiggle room. There's that blurriness in terms of, okay, I got another rep, but maybe I didn't actually get better. And so it's more of a long-term thing, right? Like, oh, I'm using the 60-pound dumbbells on hammer curls for 15. And now I'm using a little bit more. Like now I'm using the 65s or whatever, right? And that might take a year to progress those 5 pounds. And then there are other lifts that I don't track at all. If I'm doing adductor work, I don't track it. I'm already using the stack. And so I'm making it more difficult by resisting with my arms because I don't have a gym pin. Like you can't really, there's no space to put more weight on there. So I'm using the stack and then kind of resisting on the initial reps with my arms just to make it more challenging. I don't track that because there's really, like, what am I going to write? Like stack plus 20 pounds of added arm resist. Like it's just impossible anyway. So, or if it's a cable lateral raise, I have a working weight that I typically use, but I'm not even counting reps because on that, I've realized that tracking actually gets in the way of stimulating the muscle because I become so focused on the numbers that, I want to get more, but I should actually be moving in a way that stimulates the area better. And so if tracking doesn't help you and is counterproductive on some lifts, it's probably not actually worth tracking. I think a default for beginners should absolutely be tracking. But you might find over time that some lifts might not be worth keeping up with.
Right. Okay. And now going back to like the arm and stuff, like you just think it's all bulking and cutting and making sure to really just prioritize them earlier in the lift, especially for triceps with someone that's like stubborn ones like me, just prioritize them and bulk and early, right? Anything special? There can't be anything too special to it, no?
I would say exercise selection, technique, volume, bulking, and then like high degrees of effort. And effort is one of those things you kind of always have to be sharpening the sword and staying on top of things and making every set really, really count. And so I'll have a video soon. I don't know if it'll be out before or after this or after this. I'll have a new video on arm training, which is definitely one of the more requested topics that I get. And so I would say, those two things are what have really driven the progress for me. And it's hard to say what percentage of what thing, what percentage was bulking and how high did I have to bulk, right? What percentage was the exercise selection or the technique or the effort or any of these other things? It's almost difficult to break them down into percentages because let's say there's 5 things and you do 4 of them perfectly, but then you're, say, 8% body fat and you're trying to maintain that, you're not going to get 80% of the results. You're going to get 0 results because that thing is the limiting factor. Similarly, let's say you do everything perfectly except the effort is lacking. Again, you're not going to get 80% of the results. You're going to get 0 results because that one thing becomes the limiting factor. So I would say assess which thing might be holding you back. Could be exercise selection, technique, effort, bulking, something else, and find out which is the limiter and just focus mostly on that, right? Because your exercise selection might be on point, your effort might be on point, but maybe the way you do overhead extensions is getting a little bit too pressy, right? Or maybe you're doing your hammer curls, but there's something about your grip position where the brachialis is maybe not the limiter somehow or something, right? Like I've seen people do hammer curls and they're actually kind of like underhand, right? Where, they maybe are in the bottom position, they're hammer, but then in the top, they're underhand, right? Or maybe they're it's more like an underhand and the limiter is actually their forearm rather than the brachialis. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be limiting someone's progress. And then, finding out which it is or which ones they are, and then bringing those up is the way to go.
So how aggressive, and with these bulks and cuts, obviously you're talking about your calories, how aggressively fast are you taking your bulks? Are you just like, kind of, I'm done with cutting now, it's just time to eat, and you kind of just gobble gobble, and you're talking like 8-pound water fluctuations within 1 week?
I mean, yeah, if you look at, because I do weigh myself, not quite every morning, but on a pretty regular basis, probably 4 to 7 times a week, I would say. And it's super easy. Just, wake up, go to the bathroom, come back, step on the scale. It takes like 10 seconds or something, right? Like super, super easy to do and very, very valuable information. When I hear people they're tracking everything, like all the calories, everything, and then they're not weighing themselves, I'm like, okay, well, you're tracking the input to the system. You can't really track the output, your calories expended, and then they're also not tracking the result. And so, they're like, oh, I'm in a deficit, but I'm not losing weight. Well, probably not in a deficit. You could argue for a recomp or something, but, so yeah, I do weigh myself on a pretty frequent basis. I will say that my rate of weight gain is different based on my body composition. So yeah, after my cut in 2023, I gained weight pretty rapidly. Just because, you do have this like, oh, screw this, I'm done. I'm just going to eat. I haven't eaten properly in months. And so, yeah, what's that Kai Green quote? Like, he's doing the exercise bike or something. He's pre-contest. You can tell he's really hungry. He's like, I'm going to, after this prep, I'm going to tear some cake apart. I'm going to tear that cake apart. And so, yeah, after you've been cutting for that long and you're super hungry, I mean, you can put away some massive quantities of food, especially if you start early. I mean, you can have 10 or 15,000 calorie days without too much problem, right? But then when I'm already bulked up, I might not even be gaining weight actively. And that's where I actually might main gain. If I'm 18, 19, 20% body fat, I'm just eating normally. I'm eating to satiation. I'm eating to where I'm not hungry anymore. I'm slightly full. And I'm kind of just maintaining my body weight. Maybe it goes down slightly, maybe it goes up slightly, depending on what kinds of foods I'm eating or my schedule or that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's totally dependent on where I am in the year and my body fat percentage.
Okay. And now, like, when you're bulking and cutting with the sleep, obviously sleep gets better when you're eating more. It gets worse when you're cutting down. Like, do you wake up often in the middle of the night to go bathroom? And yeah, yes or no? Because like, I don't know. I don't know if that really like affects your sleep. That might.
Yeah,
I feel like that gets into the nitty-gritty of everything. It's just like there's so much to intertwine and you make crazy progress. I'm just like, what do you experience on the daily, you know?
yeah. So again, when I'm above 15%, I mean, I sleep through the night 98%. of the time, 99% of the time, the vast majority. I mean, I can't remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. I mean, it's been months and months and months. It just doesn't happen. On the other hand, if someone does wake up in the middle of the night, I don't think it makes a huge difference either. Right? I see some people where, I mean, I've had clients like this where they kind of freak out if sleep wasn't perfect and they almost self defeat. Like, oh, there's no way I could perform well. It's like, you got 8 hours of sleep. There was just like a 5 minute break in the middle. Right. So I don't think it impacts things that much, but I also think it's a good sign overall if you can sleep through the night. But how much of a difference does it make? Hard to say.
Okay, now do you have any like future what are your future plans and goals right now? Like what are your what are the big next moves? Yeah. You had a nutrition book on the way you mentioned. You have what's going on?
So I'll probably do. So I started the nutrition book, but the thing is, I think with a training book, you can kind of just sort of, you don't need references and scientific links and PubMed and all that stuff. But with nutrition, I almost feel like it's a little bit different. Where if you say something, you kind of need to provide evidence for it. And then even there was some stuff that I believed, and then I like tried to reference it, and I'm like, oh, I don't even know if that's true. Like, I think that's true. It's a feeling I have, but I'm not entirely sure if there's actually as much evidence for that as I thought there was. And so it became kind of a drag to reference because I don't really have a problem writing. Like, that comes fairly natural to me, I would say. But kind of stopping yourself every few sentences and having to look something up, I mean, really extended the process. So I will either do it and it'll take freaking forever, or I might just say, hey, at the start, like this, there's no reference here. It's just sort of my experience, that kind of thing. It's more practical rather than like an evidence based tome of nutrition.
All right, well that's good. All right, so you were just talking about we were talking about the continuation and expansion of the GVS era and his new realms of conquest. So, like, other than this nutrition book, are you still working on it, or is something else going on?
It's kind of on hold. I'll probably do. Sorry, the dog is. My wife got a bunch of carrots for him slash me, and he was trying to steal those. Yeah, I've become kind of more selective with projects that I take on, just because, yeah, I have sort of started stuff and then got burnt out and kind of felt bad about either starting them or announcing them. So I would say maybe a biomechanics sort of technique book, because that's something I'm a little bit more interested in. And so I'll probably be dieting down towards 11, 12-ish% body fat for the summer pretty soon. And so those will be good to go hand in hand, just because generally it's better to have pictures for an anatomy book when you're not 20% body fat, just because you can't see anything. And so, yeah, that'll probably be written up this summer-ish, and then maybe in the fall, but we'll see. I try to take my time with the books and do the best possible job that I can, just because, yeah, I'm not the kind of person who really rushes things and then puts out something that people are not going to be happy with. I try to take my time and put out the best quality product possible.
And so with this biomechanic type of thing, this is just like lift tempo, like specifics with like each movement and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be the full body and everything I've learned with regards to how to perform movements, visualizations, a huge variety of movements. It'll be kind of a continuation from the previous two training books that I have. And I try to have as little overlap as possible between books, there will probably be a little bit of overlap with sweat, just because that has a bunch of exercises in it. But man, I've learned so much about every single movement, just in terms of greater depth and detail from the time it was first released 7 years ago. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of knowledge that I've gained, and I'm excited to pass it on to people.
Now, what would you say to someone, the average person who's struggling with their mobility right now? For me, I'd say go straight to rings, do some pullovers, right?
Rings are good. What kind of mobility? Because it's, I mean, that's totally locally dependent, right? Like if they have really, hunched over posture, or, they need to open up. So I would say generally, for me, the areas that I tend to struggle with are like hip flexors and like just hip mobility.
Right.
But man, everyone's different. Like some people, they have really bad shoulder mobility. For me, shoulders are I'm actually pretty mobile in my shoulders.
Right.
And so it's just so independent for sure.
Because I feel like it's going to be the pullovers with the thoracic extension, the dead hangs, and all the calisthenics that will really just allow you to do tough movements that put you in precarious positions, like the BTN press, Klokov press, like is essential, I feel like, to maximize your upper body.
A lot of people, they lack the ability to really overhead press.
Right.
And so they kind of turn everything into an incline. Like everything turns into sort of an arch back incline press, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's an upright row, they're not actually using their delts, they're using lower back. Like their flat press turns into a decline. And like if someone wants to lift the most amount of weight, that probably makes sense. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you're trying to target some specific areas of the physique, often people are using their technique in order to avoid the areas that they kind of want to be training.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So, how often would you say you go back to your rings? Because obviously you do that. You did it during the lockdown. And, there's a lot of things that you could do on rings that you can't replicate on a machine, right?
Yeah.
You could do, like...
I wouldn't say I program hop, but sometimes I do something for a few months, and then I kind of get like bored of it or tired of it, and then maybe I'll pick it up at a later date. And I try to at least give myself a few months with something, because that gives you the progression, and it allows you to really understand at a decent level, maybe not like a high level, but at least at a moderate intermediate-ish level of what that training tool can offer. And so for me, I did a while where I had like one ring session a week. I actually really enjoyed that. But like on some of the higher skill stuff, I found I needed a little bit more than once per week. Like maybe a ring dip I would want a little bit more frequently. And some people, like they come very naturally just to the stability side of things. Man, when I first tried to do a ring dip, it was a mess. It was all over the place. And so for me, I wasn't that good at them, but I did improve fairly quickly. But for now, I haven't done them in a long time. Same thing with the chest expander. Like I did it for several months. And I almost feel like sometimes it's good to take a break from a modality, because then when you come back to it, you're almost learning things that you might not have learned the first time through. So sometimes setting something on a shelf and then coming back to it later could be beneficial, but it's tough because I could take my rings to the gym, but like then I have to take the bag, and it's a little bit of an annoyance. So I'll probably come back to them at some point, but I don't have any immediate plans to do that. Okay.
And now, like, with your calisthenics on your bulks, what do you think about that? Like, let's say, like, you're trying to progress on calisthenics, or you do it often and, let's say you're
Yeah.
very good weighted, like Alpha Destiny or someone else, you're
Yeah.
banging out 3 plates on dips or something like that, and you're bulking, right? You just keep it in there. Like, what do you have to do? Or it's just all
So I think there's kind of two mentalities that you can have. One is that if you're bulking, your performance might decrease, and it might. I mean, if I shredded down to 89 or 90 kilos, just under 200 pounds, I would be better at dips. I would be better at pull-ups. I'd probably be better at a lot of ring stuff as well. And when I'm bulked up at 105, 106 kilos, yeah, you're just moving more weight, so it's more challenging. And so sometimes, yeah, your performance might be decreasing slightly when you're bulking. And that could be viewed as a negative, especially if you're really focused on the performance side of things. But you can also look at it like, oh, I have a free weighted vest that I'm carrying around, right? And so I look at it more like the latter, I would say. And so if my performance decreases when I'm bulked up, I'm actually totally okay with that. And it's just something that you kind of have to take into account when you're comparing performances, because it's just more difficult when you're bulked up. Yeah.
okay. And now, for like just general calisthenics progression, like those you see people banging out 3 plates on dips, would you say that all required specialization or just continuous progression on them over time?
I think everyone's different here. Yeah. I mean, that I probably said that a lot during this interview, but there are some people who don't need very much specialization and they can get very strong on a variety of lifts. I mean, I've seen people starting strength their way to 4-plate or even 5-plate squats. And that's a bit of a specific, because you're squatting 3 times a week, right? But it's not exactly the most nuanced of programming. It's literally starting strength, right? So it's meant for beginners. And some people plateau on starting strength really early, like not even 2 plates, or even like a plate and a half for their 5x5, right? And so that's partly, are you willing to eat enough to gain weight? It's partly genetic. It's partly your hard work, the environment, your stress. And so it's hard to say how much people would need specialization. I mean, there are some people, there are gymnasts who go in and deadlift 4 plates the first time they ever deadlift.
Crazy.
Right. Like, they have the grip strength from all the work they do. They have the core strength. They have the hip strength. They're very powerful athletes. There are farm boys who deadlift 5 plates the first time. They're used to moving heavy stuff, especially in awkward positions. And they're like, okay, what do you mean I just pick it up? It's just right there. It's not even moving. It's like not an alligator or some shit I've been wrestling. It's like I just pick it up and it's a bar.
Like, how big of a factor would you say genetics really is for hypertrophy? Obviously.
Again, I would break this down into some things are completely genetic and some things are really not much genetic. So, for example, someone's waist size, mostly genetic. If someone comes to me and they have this big blocky waist and they have a goal physique and it's Steve Reeves, there's not really anything I can do to change that. It's just structural, right? And so, for me, my upper traps, like muscle insertions, again, genetics. You can't change your insertions. For me, my upper traps, they insert very high. Like they insert all the way up into basically the base of my neck, right? Yeah. All the way up into my skull, basically. And that's genetic. Like there are pictures of me before I lifted weights at all, and I had visible traps from the front. And I didn't do anything for that. And there are some people who they don't have very high trap insertions. For whatever reason, you just can't see them very much from the front. And no matter what they do all the shrugs in the world, and they're just not going to have the same look. On the other hand, there are some things that are not nearly as genetically determined. For example, fat loss. I think maybe there's a genetic component when you get really shredded. You see some people where they just have an easier time getting really peeled, right? But man, if someone's like 25% body fat and they're trying to get down to say 16% body fat and they're talking about their genetics, like that probably does play a role, but it's also not something that is usually going to be the limiting factor. And so, yeah, usually that's just coping. That's just people complaining, people trying to have an excuse. And it just depends on someone's goal. If someone wants to run 100 meters in 10 seconds or less, you need a very specific set of genetics for that. Like that is, you need to have elite sprinter genetics to even make that a possibility, right? And then you also need to have the training and the environment and everything else to allow that to even happen, right? But you need the genetics. Now, if someone wants to run 12 seconds in the 100 meters, that's where genetics is still a factor, but it becomes a lot easier to do. And if it's 15 seconds, I mean, that's where genetics, if someone whips out the genetic card, they're like, man, I can't run a 15-second 100 meter. I think genetics is far, far, far less likely to play a role because a greater proportion of the population is capable of doing that. And so at the peripheries of the bell curve, genetics matter a ton. So if someone says to me, hey, I want to become I want to become Mr. Olympia, right? I want to become the IFBB Pro Mr. Olympia. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
genetics,
right? Genetics and then genetic response to the drugs, on top of the drugs, on top of many years of training, on top of the support system, in terms of the money to pay for the drugs. And just, I mean, there's a laundry list of things that need to happen to make someone Mr. Olympia. And so one of those is genetics. Whereas if someone wants to get in pretty good shape for the beach, I mean, about anyone can do that. Yeah.
Hard work.
I mean, except like the periphery on the other end of the bell curve, right? Like you see those people where, you know, they're 600 pounds and they're like glued to their couch. They will probably never be going to be able to get like a respectable beach physique, maybe. But for them, they put on fat so easily. They have so many hunger signals. They're just so far skewed to the put on fat easily, and they would have to be just so restrictive and so on point. It might still be possible, but for them, staying at 25% body fat would be a tremendous victory. And so if their goal is like 12, 13% and like looking really good for the beach, that is where genetics just might make that to be practically impossible. Like you could say theoretically, if they did everything right, maybe they could, but in a practical sense, it just might not be happening either. But most people, they're in that middle part of the bell curve where their genetics probably are not going to be the things. And notice I say things because genetics is a whole bunch of different factors, right? It's like it's your insertions, it's your ability to lose fat, it's your bone structure, it's a lot of other things. And so it's not just usually genetics is talked about as a singular, right? Like he has good genetics, right? Like there's a lot of, I guess that is a plural, but you know, your genetic makeup is a whole bunch of things. And so, yeah, I would say it's pretty clear I have better than average genetics, but I've also done a lot of other things that kind of blur the lines, right? Like I've been more consistent than at least 99% of people who go to the gym. I know more than at least 99% of people who go to the gym. I work harder than 99% of people that go to the gym. And to a certain extent, that sounds big-headed, but it's also not that hard to do to get in the top 1%, right? Because most people are not consistent. Most people are not following up and constantly learning. And then most people, they're not really putting forth a magnificent effort on every single set, right? And so I get way more comments about my genetics now than 5 years ago, and then 10 years ago as well. Right. So, yeah, I would say genetics matters, but a lot of other things matter too.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to it. What would you say to anyone who's just like stuck, you know, like You know, the overconsumption. Wouldn't you say that's like a huge thing nowadays with all this dopamine on social media and whatever?
Yeah, unless it's my content, in which
You're
case you
not.
consume it, maybe. But yeah, it can be where I get sent stuff from people all the time where they're thinking about training so much more than actually training. And it's okay to think about your training, but if it's more than actually training, I think that's where it can get a little bit out of hand. Or even where people are like, how much muscle can I gain in a year? And they've never even gone to the gym. Well, it's really hard to say. And maybe just lift and try to get better over time, right? If you're not lifting and being observant and trying to get better at that process, I think people are kind of missing the point where you can't know the outcome before you do it. And it's really hard to predict future results when you haven't gotten any results because you haven't even started the process. So, I think a lot of people, it's okay to think about things. It's okay to watch fitness videos and get excited about training and passionate. But at the end of the day, your muscles don't necessarily know how many studies you read or how many videos you watched or how many books you read or anything like that. They just know stress and tension, and that might help you to do better at doing that in the future, but you can't avoid the lifting side of things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Have you experimented with training like your lagging muscle groups on like just other days, like just putting upper body things on lower body? Do you delve into that a lot?
Yeah. I mean, especially for some areas like the back, I've done higher frequencies. So maybe I do some back work on the bro day, and then the back is already involved with a lot of the hinging. And so, yeah, some areas that you can just train them a little bit more frequently, like rear delts or side delts. And I think it can be good to have a bit of specialization at times in order to really drive progression. On the other hand, sometimes that can actually get in the way as well, where you feel like you're doing more and you are doing more, but it's not actually helping your progress. You just feel like it is because you're hitting that area more frequently. And yeah, so I would say it's worth experimenting with. But for hypertrophy, if you can't make gains as a beginner on twice a week for a muscle group, I wouldn't necessarily jump to 3 or 4 days a week. And for an intermediate, yeah, if someone's like, I spam lateral raises and it's like 6 or 7 days a week and their shoulders aren't growing, I think maybe cutting back and focusing a little bit more on quality rather than frequency could be the way to go.
Okay. Now, is there anything else you want to like go over, maybe touch on, talk about a little bit? I feel like I've.
No, I think we covered a pretty wide variety of topics.
Yeah.
So good questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Well, you have a good one, man. Take it easy.